Hello and welcome to the Field Engineer. Today we are speaking with Rosemary Coates, who is the Executive Director at Reshoring Institute. She's the President of Blue Silk Consulting and an expert in global supply chains and an author of very many books as well. So welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. So just starting off, I just wanted to get a little bit more about your background. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your career path, a little bit about what you do, and we'll get into supply chains and how it links to field service in a moment.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's see. We'll start with education. So I have an undergraduate degree in business logistics from Arizona State University and an MBA from the University of San Diego. I've been in supply chain management for over 40 years, starting out through the transportation industry and in manufacturing, and worked in industry for Hewlett Packard and for a defense contractor. And then I also worked for SAP, the big software company.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in industry. And then in management consulting, I've been in management consulting for about 25 years, worked
Hmm.
for some big companies and then on my own. And during that time, I had occasion to work with field service groups within companies that we were consulting to on several occasions. And it became very clear to me this was a field that was underrepresented in the literature, as well as not very well positioned in most companies, wasn't positioned at a high enough level. And so I got really passionate about field service. I feel like we really need to highlight field service and to examine the kind of attributes and the kind of information that the field service staff can bring to an organization. So along the way, I was working with Siemens actually on a consulting project, and they had a big field service organization in this division. And so I decided to write a book and wrote it with a partner who was a former director of a field service organization. So together we wrote a book called 42 Rules for Superior Field Service. And it sort of filled a gap. There wasn't much written out there about field service. So I'm just, over time, I've worked with a lot of organizations, and I have some, as I said, some passion about uh, elevating the field service organization and the thoughts and minds of C-level executives.
Hmm. Hmm. Brilliant, excellent. So I'm sure that people who are watching this will be going and grabbing your book as well. You've got a huge amount of industry experience that you've just mentioned there. Can you give us some examples of examples where you've seen it work really well in terms of the interoperation between field service, supply chains, and give us some sense of what good and what great looks like?
Yeah, I think, overall, there's an awareness that field service provides an essential service for a company's customers. And there are some great examples where there's focus on it and other examples where it's the primary focus. So, for example, I worked for a Silicon Valley company. I actually live in Silicon Valley, but I've worked all over the world. Um, but there's a Silicon Valley company that provides internet networking equipment, and their equipment phones home when it's starting to die or weaken or slow down. And that was really the first time I've been introduced to that was about 10 years ago. Very interesting. I mean, they really focused hard on field service, trying to keep their customers up and running. It
Hmm.
became very, very important. And so their organization looked a little bit different. They had staffing around the world. They had inventory in regions around the world, in Singapore for Asia, for example, and a different kind of organization focused on keeping their customers up and running. So it was sort of a 7/24 operation, and that was good. I mean, they had a nice setup. They were focused on elevating field service. And I think they accomplished what they were looking for. And then there have been others where field service was an afterthought. And even though the organization produced a fair amount of revenue for repairs in the field and so forth, it just never rose to the level that I thought it needed to in terms of companies. And then there are some companies that are very creative and innovative. For example, after 9/11, the terrorist attacks in New York City, I was working with a telecom company that had field service organization to get their telecom equipment maintained and so forth. When 9/11 happened, of course, it shut down all of the communications in lower Manhattan. And they had actually practiced how to respond in an emergency situation. Not like this, of course. I mean, who could have predicted the Twin Towers coming down? But they had practiced and done some scenarios and actually did some planning on how they would respond in a terrible incident or natural disaster. And so they were able to get technicians on the ground walking into the area and able to repair some of the communications equipment within hours, which was quite amazing. I mean, considering the whole lower half of Manhattan was just destroyed essentially. And so, there are organizations like that where I think it's brilliant that they have done all this planning and were ready and prepared and could respond appropriately.
Brilliant. And what do you think it is about those businesses? Is it the representation at the senior level and the I guess the awareness of the importance of the field? I mean, for me personally, I've spent my most of my career in field service, and I know the value, and I say to my colleagues, we've got eyes and ears out there, and really good source of information, and really good customer contacts to give you that information that the businesses crave. So I think there's that. But I'm just wondering, what is it about those businesses that are successful, and why is it? Do you think that they have those successes?
Yeah, I think the ones that are most successful are there is an awareness at the senior executive level in an organization of how important they are. And also, one of the other keys I think is the marketing organization within a company should be paying close attention to whatever the field service people are saying, right? I
Right.
mean, it's an extremely valuable way of collecting information regarding customers and should be highlighted and that information should be taken back and included in planning and new products and all kinds of things. But
Yeah.
I think what happens, and it's the same thing with supply chain overall, and for the past 40 years or so, these functions, supply chain and field service and um, trade compliance, some of these things were thought of as kind of an afterthought or an administrative sort of process or a requirement or something like that, and not looked at as what kind of contribution they could actually make. And then the pandemic hit.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
used to tell people, you know, somebody would ask me what I did for a living pre-pandemic, and I would say supply chain, and their eyes would sort of glaze over, and they're like, move to the bar, weren't too interested, sounded dull, sounded low level in an organization. And then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, supply chain is
Right up
king,
there. Yeah.
right? Yeah. And executives are very aware of vulnerabilities in supply chain. I think the same kind of thing should be recognized with respect to field service because of the vulnerability. I mean, these are your customers you're serving. The field service people should be treated like gold,
Hmm.
because they have the information, they have the touch with the customers, and the information they can bring back should be incorporated, as I said, into master planning for any
Yeah.
organization.
Absolutely. And the good and the bad, get the feedback. Oh, the customer loves
Right.
this, or get it back that or they're struggling with this. Because as soon as you get that information from one or two areas, you start to develop a really good picture about your customer experience and the rest of it. Okay, move it. Just switching tack a little bit. Um, what from your perspective? Yeah, again, you've got this huge amount of experience. What is it that the businesses sometimes get wrong when it comes to supply chains, when it comes to the interaction with the field? I've seen it in some businesses, but are there some common themes where people are missing out on opportunities?
Well, yeah, I mean, connected to what we were just saying, one of the things I think they get wrong is they look at field service, organizations look at field service as training technicians on how to fix equipment. And in my view, these field service people all need to be also trained in how to interact with the customer, how to
Yeah,
communicate well, how to bring information back, how to mine for information. So when you're out there in the field talking to the customer, you should be asking 20 questions, about what's going on, competitive information. That's really important.
yeah,
What kind of products and issues the customers are trying to solve. These field service people are golden, a golden connection, and need to really be trained and connected as much as they need to know how to fix equipment. They need to know how to mine for information. And I
yeah.
think that part of it is kind of ignored. Another thing that occurs to me is the world's changed so much over my career. It used to be that we looked at customers as being out there, either domestic or somebody in the world. We might ship to some other country or a foreign customer somewhere. Today's environment is completely different. We are the world, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
We can instantly look things up on the internet. We can connect over email. We can do all these things that we couldn't do 40 years ago. And as a result, most companies have installations around the world. And the overlay to that is the requirements and issues with different cultures.
Hmm.
So, for example, this one organization I was working with, we did I was working on a consulting project in field service, and we did some surveying on how different, uh, different regions of the world responded when they had an issue.
Hmm.
So, if you're in America and the field service agent is here, he's likely to be doing diagnostics and repairing equipment and doing all the things that are required to get the customer back and up and running. If you're in China and doing field service, the response is usually let's shut the equipment down and install new equipment. Let's just
Right.
put something new in there. There's less focus on repair. It's really kind of interesting. It's sort of a replacement culture.
Hmm.
And you have to understand that, I mean, this organization was saying to me, why do we get all these replacements in China? It's the same equipment around the world. And I think it's cultural. It's kind of this idea of replacing everything when it goes wrong. If you were in Germany, you send out the technician to do analysis first. And
Right.
then the actual people who are fixing stuff come later. So you send out a field engineer with a laptop who's doing analysis, and then there's a second step to it, which is the repair part. So, these are cultural things, cultural overlays. Not that the equipment's different or different demands, but respecting culturally how this happens and being able to plan and prepare for it is important with field service leadership to know and understand that, so they can train appropriately and understand why certain things go on in certain regions and others they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, you've touched on so much there. I'm just going to highlight some of the things you've picked up on. So, that whole point around the gold that field service can mine. I often think of fixing a customer. Yes, you're there to fix a problem, but have the conversation, delve deep. It may not be just it's fallen down. It may be a training issue and what the customer's doing. And yes, absolutely. Give the field service engineers training on how to pick up on things, but give them the tools to generate those leads. When a customer says, "Oh yeah, the competitor's system's been down all week," let's capture that. Let's feed that into our sales teams. Let's prime them. Say, "Hey, there's a golden opportunity here to get in." So I think there's so much in there, and then coming on to around the cultural differences. Again, anyone who's worked across borders, even within regions, you get significant differences. In Europe, there's a classic distinction between a little bit north-south divide in terms of who's willing to pay for service and who thinks it should be included in the product itself. Yeah, so yeah, lots in there of good content for our members.
You
Brilliant.
know, the other thing that I think is really important to recognize is that systems, information gathering and providing information to field services changed significantly in the
Yeah,
past 25 years or so. I
yeah,
mean, now everybody's, packed with a laptop or some kind of device that they can look things up, that they have access to systems in the field, that they can collect data that way. We didn't have that
yeah.
at prior to ERP systems back in the 80s and 70s. It was everything on paper.
Mhm.
So, that's significant too, and that's a great way of mining information as well. And then, from the leadership standpoint too, I think it's really important uh, to note that once again, the information that is collected in the field are by these people that are touching the customer. They're there standing next to the customer. Um, that information should flow back, but then it needs to be used also. So
Yeah,
it isn't just a matter of collecting the data, you have to use it as
yeah.
information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, collecting it, write it. I've written it down now. My job is done.
Right.
That's not where the value is, right?
Right.
All right. So you've mentioned some of the changes that we've seen over the past 30, 40 years. Clearly there are some changes going on right now, some challenges, plenty of opportunity. There's geopolitical stuff going on. I'm not going to delve too much into that, but there's things changing the world. There's also, everyone's talking about AI and what that can do, whether it's talking about predictive maintenance or the connectivity of your the things that you're servicing. What do you see as some of the opportunities and challenges that maybe just in the next few years?
Yeah, I think the integration of systems and data collection is going to continue to grow, as will the application of AI to help diagnose what's a problem with the system, and how to optimize field service organizations and the information that's being collected. So there's no doubt there's a continuum on systems that are going to be software that will be implemented to help collect that data. I mean, I think that's a march that's going to be ongoing for a long time because there are always improvements coming for sure.
Sure.
But as you mentioned, geopolitics, boy, it's going to have a whipsaw effect on what happens. I mean, if you are sending, field service people to a region or a country that's part of the geopolitical landscape these days, you have to be aware of that and protect your field service people. I mean, they may not be able to get into the country to begin with
Yeah.
because they can't get a visa if you're fighting with that country. So, all of a sudden the leadership in field service has become this broad worldwide responsibility that has to pay attention to developments in technology as well as developments in geopolitics. And in the United States these days, boy, politics has a heavy hand, as I'm sure
Yeah.
you're aware.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and unpredictability, and it's important for all businesses to pay attention to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so one other thing I will, kind of coming towards the end. Want to ask you, what advice would you give to managers in supply chains and field service? Clearly, these two groups interoperate, very closely. What advice would you give to those leaders out there going forward?
Yeah, I think there are certain themes that are in parallel with global supply chain management, and that's to build resiliency into your systems. So, uh, not just saying our processes are one way or specifically defined, but instead um, developing alternatives and teaching your field service people to be flexible in the field, to make decisions, but also to be flexible enough to respond to customers' needs in a different way, or one way today and a different way next week. And that kind of resilience is essential, I think, for the current world situation. I mean, just don't know who's going to invade somebody and start a war, or what politics in the area are going to say you can't come and look at this equipment, or you have to develop systems that can fix things remotely. There
Yeah,
are there are all sorts of different ways and avenues of putting together resiliency and alternatives in a field service organization. That's the responsibility of the field service leadership, and you need to pay attention to that. I mean, not from my point of view, leadership in field service organizations has really matured. It used to be it was hands-on, sort of manage people. Where are they in the field, and maybe expediting parts, that sort of thing. Today, it's much more strategic thinking. Field service leadership has to be very strategic about developing alternatives, using information that's coming back from the field, awareness of geopolitics. I mean, this is a whole much bigger job than it was 25 years ago.
excellent. Rosemary, thank you very much for your insight. Thanks very much for speaking to us today. To our members, please do hit the like button and subscribe. We'll be bringing you more content in the very near future. Rosemary, thank you very much indeed.
Yes, thank you. It was my pleasure.